given examples of a nation that has done it. Okay, in 40 years they moved a whole. In our lifetime, we've seen them move from a poor country to the second largest economy in the world. So the question of possibility to me, okay, it's a moot issue. It is possible. Now, do we have the will? Do we have the determination? Do we have the focus? Are we ready to have the discipline to stick to the important areas? That is what we need to do. So it's not a question of whether it can be done or whether it can or not. It's whether we as a country are ready to do it. If you just look at the outcomes, you'll see that you cannot treat this same country with one broad brush. Okay, if you're looking at basic education, for example, Lagos is far ahead of Kano. Now, if you're a governor in Kano, you would expect that you spend more of your budget on basic education, on girl child education, and less on roads and bridges and airports. Okay, while Lagos is probably far ahead in those areas. Now, Lagos has its own challenges around the environment, around overpopulation, around urbanization, industrial pollution, and so on, and they will spend money on that. So the important is at the subnational level, people need to understand what are the most important developmental priorities, and with their limited resources, make sure they address the most important ones that have the highest impact on the SDGs. You can't spend money on 17 SDGs. You've got to pick 2 or 3 that you focus on, and every part of the country needs to decide for itself which one is most important.
A developed Africa will not be antagonistic to industrialized countries, but will become friends and partners in prosperity, security, and development. A prosperous Africa will mean greater prosperity for the rest of the world. A poor Africa will be a drag on the rest of the world. Is this what the international community wants? A coordinated multilateral effort should be set in motion to utilize and maximize the use of the enormous resources on the African continent for the benefit of all nations. Investing partners will be able to recoup their investment unifold over time. Current attempts to help develop Africa by industrial countries are uncoordinated and plainly incremental. We have the skills, the manpower, and the natural resources, but in many instances, we lack the capital. Hence my plea for industrial countries to take a long-term view of Africa. We request you to come and partner with us to develop the continent for the benefit of all. Africa charges you with the singular task of initiating the effort we are calling for. The United Nations has in place processes for promoting collective action to combat global threats. No threat is more potent than poverty and exclusion. They are the foul source from which common criminality, insurgency, cross-border crimes, human trafficking, and its terrible consequences draw their inspiration. Poverty, in all its manifestations, remains one of the greatest challenges facing our world. Its eradication is an indispensable requirement for achieving sustainable development. In this regard, Nigeria has developed a national social investment program, a pro-poor scheme that targets the poorest and most vulnerable households in the country. Under this initiative, easy access to financial services are facilitated to traders, artisans, market women, and cooperative societies. This type of initiative can help lessen and eventually eliminate mass poverty in Africa. At the core of our efforts to build an inclusive society, our programs are focused on youth and women empowerment. These programs aim at ensuring women and youth participation in governance, industry, climate action, and agriculture. The world was shocked and startled by the massacre in New Zealand by a lone gunman taking the lives of 50 worshippers. This and similar crimes, which had been fueled by social media networks, risk seeping into the fabric of an emerging digital culture. Major technical companies must be alive to their responsibilities. They cannot be allowed to continue to facilitate the separate of religious, racist, xenophobic, and false messages capable of inciting whole communities against each other, leading to loss of many lives. This could tear some countries apart. Organized criminal networks, often acting with impunity across international borders, presenting new challenges where only collective action can deliver genuine.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. By the way, Tundu, I mean, that interview with the Emir of Kano, Mohammed Sanusi II, focusing on the social development goals. You see echoes also of the focus on social development goals in the president's speech at the plenary session of the UN General Assembly. But do you really think, that those questions raised by Muhammadu Sanusi II, that the Nigerian government, has shown a readiness, the attitude, has in place a strategy to address all of those 17 goals? I know the president has talked about education, which is one of the goals he has talked about, partnerships, he's talked about climate, action on the climate. But if you look at Nigeria generally, how do you think we fared with social development goals?
Not very well, I'm afraid. That's the short answer. I do like Emir of Kano's can-do spirit. He believes that we can, as I do, but not at the moment. I feel like we're not, how do I put this tactfully? I can't.
No, use the word that comes to your head.
Vague. The plans are too vague as far as I'm concerned. They're just too vague at this point. That's how I feel.
But is there any area where you see that we have made a lot of progress?
No.
I mean, poverty, hunger, sanitation,
not with poverty eradication.
Sustainable cities and communities.
No, not at this point.
Okay, anyway, let's get somebody else's view on this. But now let's go to our guest who is already in the Abuja studio. Just yesterday, a court in Abuja, Nigeria's federal capital, discharged an acquitted journalist and leader of the hashtag Revolution Now movement, Omoyele Sowore, from a charge of treasonable felony preferred against him by the Directorate of State Service. Well, was he really discharged and acquitted?
No, he wasn't. He was
granted bail.
He was merely granted bail.
He was granted bail, and after spending about 45 days in the custody of the Department of State Security on the orders of a federal high court for allegedly planning to imperil the state with his movement. For more on this and the subject of the human rights record of the Buhari administration, we are now being joined by Dr. Shamsudeen Yusuf, Senior Research Fellow with the Center for Democracy and Development. Dr. Yusuf, you're welcome to the morning show.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm fine. Actually, you've given me a title. I'm not a doctor.
Oh, okay. Well, go and work at it and get the PhD. It will look good on you because it sounds very well. Anyway, here we go. Yesterday, Sowore was granted bail by Justice Taiwo, and he's been asked to, submit his international passport, and that whenever, the case commences, his lawyer, his counsel, Femi Falana, SAN, should ensure that it's made available. And the Sowore case has been quite controversial, particularly as the Department of State Security decided to get a detention order. But this time around, they've not applied for, an extension of that detention order. What's your take on all of this? Terrorism, revolution, Sowore as arrowhead, and then the other gentleman, who has not been mentioned in the last 24 hours, and who I think should also be part of the narrative because he was detained along with Sowore. That's the guy they call Mandate. But what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I think it's just a clear reflection of human rights status in the country. It's quite demeaning for our democracy to still be confronted with a lot of challenges. I read about the case presented by the federal government lawyer I think there is no case at all. They are emphasizing the need for them to give them the need for them for more time for them to carry out their investigation. But there wasn't too substantial case put forward by the lawyer, to establish the need for them for Justice Taiwo to give them more time. For me, it is just a reflection of where we are as a country, and generally thinking that everything we talk about democracy is just about elections. But other key core principles of democratic practices is totally absent in our democracy. And it's also a clear reflection of the need for us to start talking about the demilitarization of our democracy. We look at the cases from the time that Justice Taiwo gave 45 days in detention without providing opportunity for Sowore to even establish the need why the 45 days should be given to DSS. But as for that fact, I guess the justice acknowledged the fact that it is important for us to start protecting the core values of democracy and ensure that human rights of citizens is actually protected. The most significantly is for us to further interrogate the call of Sowore. And average Nigerians complain about the need for us to start mobilizing and advocating for need to address the issue of poverty, the issue of if you look at several reports, it's mainly acknowledged. And the thing is that providing an enabling environment for alternative voices to be heard is something that we also need to work out in our democracy. Sowore came out to say we are the democracy. If you look at the key demands of Sowore, is about corruption, which we all acknowledge that is a major challenge in the country. The issue of poverty, which we all acknowledge, consistently acknowledge as a major challenges in the country. We look at the issue of epileptic power supply and so on and so forth. These are fundamental issues that Nigerians on the street acknowledge as a major problem. And it's just for us to rally around and show our concerns to the government that this issue of poverty needed to be addressed by the government. There's a need for proactive and quite practical policies of the government to address some of these challenges. But revolution is not something that you just call and you say there's a time for citizens to mobilize. But fundamentally, revolution happens spontaneously without even knowing that it's going to happen. But preparing for it and even informing the public that there's a time and venue for us to make sure that our alternative voice is heard is not something that government should take serious as it. It is just giving an impression that perhaps government is using that opportunity to vent certain anger on Sowore. So I think we need to rethink our approach towards protecting human rights. Government will be out there every time to start saying that human rights is being protected, but fundamentally it's for us to look at issues critically and ensure that our thinking about democracy goes beyond conducting election that is largely not even credible enough for us to come out to say that we've conducted credible elections. So we need to have a rethink generally about
Shamsudeen, if you could just hold your thoughts, we'll take a short commercial break, and then when we return, we'll continue with the conversation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Shamsudeen Yusuf, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. Welcome back, Mr. Yusuf. Before you came on the show, Dr. Batsi and I were having a conversation about Sustainable Development Goals, and he was asking me for my views on our progress in that regard. I'd like to take your views on where we are along the lines of eradication of poverty and hunger by 2030 in Nigeria, which is the poverty capital of the world. Gender equality, when we have such woeful underrepresentation of women at every level, even female colleagues don't respect one another at all levels. We have health. Nigeria is the capital of maternal mortality rates in the world, even higher than India, which has a population of over 1 billion people. We also have education. We have the most out-of-school children in the world. Clean water and sanitation. Nigeria is the world's capital of open defecation. Affordable clean energy. Is that a joke? We're still obsessed with fossil fuels in Nigeria. Economic growth. Also, is that a joke? Industry, innovation, and infrastructure, where we've just had Zainab Ahmed say that we will need $100 billion for the next 30 years to close the infrastructure gap. Climate action, we have things like the Ogoni cleanup that is yet to really, take hold at this moment. Exactly. And then peace and justice. We're in a country where a man like Omoyele Sowore was granted bail yesterday and was quoted to have said he's not sure if we'll actually get bail because our relationship with the rule of law, the federal government's relationship with the rule of law, is selective at best. What are your thoughts on all of this?
I think you've responded to the question. Data speaks for itself. And I think I would like to approach this more in terms of what government is doing to address some of these problems. Since I've been growing up, the issue of poverty has been there. It's the responsibility of the government is then to see how they can innovatively address some of those challenges. Like I always say, our population in 1990 has increased by over 80%. But in terms of policy intervention, to preempt what actually would happen if Nigeria maintained an increasing or exponential increase in its population, how would the government cater for it? And fundamentally, is that it's not something that we need to just assess one administration, but rather successive administration in the last 20 years to look at what substantial has been done to address some of these challenges. The issue of poverty is there. We go to the street the street of Lagos, Abuja, everywhere you see poverty on a daily basis. It's not just poverty, you see abject poverty. You see people begging for alms, people begging to feed themselves and their family. And not that there's, if you look at other economies, it's not that people provide or get job opportunity only in the formal sector. We have a very robust and growing informal sector. It creates more job opportunity for people, at least for them not to be referred to as people living in abject poverty. So government over the years, they've really not really doing anything. The DA's administration has been, doing something about social investment program. But to what extent has that addressed the issue of poverty? To what extent is it sustainable for government to go ahead with this? And what has been the priority of the government? Do we need to prioritize intervention in the energy sector, so that if we have more, we'll be able to address epileptic power supply, we'll be able to create an enabling environment for informal sector to thrive. Are we looking at addressing the issue of taxation, double taxation or multiple taxations that has had more economic implication on the livelihood of women, in the informal economy. So these are the fundamental issues that government, we need to look at the priority before us. We need to look at what kind of incremental policy interventions that we need to make to address this, and how this flows into the other, and how can we robustly engage different stakeholders in ensuring that we're able to record, monitor and evaluate our successes and learn from that process. I don't really see that happening at the moment, and most importantly is even that we are developing policies and programs without even knowing the people that we are developing it for. We don't know our population. The last population census, which was not, I'm not sure it was even approved by the government, the figure, was carried out in 2006. That was That was 13 years ago, and that's supposed to be coming up on every 13 years. But that is not happening. So if you look at poverty, I don't see more proactive and responsive actions on the part of the government in addressing that. Because if you want to address poverty, you need to look at more practical interventions to create more robust and engaging and quite inclusive informal economy. If we want to do that, government needs to go beyond the current intervention strategies. If we want to address the issue of climate change, I know citizens has a lot of role to play, but government also needs to think about how to address a lot of challenges with regards to gas pollution, gas flaring, which is more common in the South, and few other issues associated with that. If we look at the issue of insecurity, in a society or in a country that we have different dimensions of insecurity, it poses a great threat to development to happen. Look at the farmer-elders conflict. Kidnapping is everywhere across the country. A lot of FDI wouldn't come because of the fear. I was in UK a few weeks ago, and I was having a discussion with somebody, and they said, "Oh, I don't want to go to Lagos." And I was like trying to engage the person and reorientate the person. But the person was quite convinced with the kind of information, the level of insecurity in terms of kidnapping and so on and so forth that is happening around the state. So these are the things that create fears, perpetual fears, and dissuade people in bringing in their money and investing in the country when there is serious insecurity in the country. And when we have quite unstable policy of the government. Today we ban there's a tomato policy that banned the implementation. Yeah, there's a clear-cut positive intent behind some of these policies. But we need to also to look at what are the measures that we've put in place to ensure free flow of what we have banned the importation for. So these are some of the fundamental things that government needs to look at for them to be able to say that they are walking the talk, but not just talking for the sake of talking.
Yes, Shamsudeen, you are quite right, but let's go back to this Shure issue again. What do you think that the federal government should do now that the court has given an order for him to be granted bail? And I ask that question because we have had situations in the past whereby, the federal government or, state agencies will say, well, yes, there is rule of law, but there is national security. More so as Shure was charged for treasonable felony. What do you think the federal government should do in this particular case? And I ask that question because I've not read anywhere that Shure has been released by the Department of State Security, given the fact that his bail conditions seem so straightforward. Submit your passport to the registrar of the court, and then counsel should make sure that he's available whenever he's needed.
If we go back to history since 2015, this administration is known for not respecting court order. So I won't be surprised if eventually Shure is not released. I won't really be surprised, but it will also be good in the spirit of rule of law that the government respect the order and the decision of Justice Taiwo to ensure and fast-track immediate release of Shure. I think for any government that's always use the word rule of law. And when we say rule of law, it talks about the supremacy of the Constitution and the independence of the judiciary, and also the need to respect whatever interpretation that the judiciary gives to the law. So I would expect the administration to immediately release Shure. And, sometimes the government is very quick at stating that the personal right is not absolute. Yeah, we know it's not absolute, but not when it is being deliberately, denied. It is something that we need to. We've seen a lot of clamping down on different media organizations by the security agencies in the name of national security, and which doesn't give room for even fair hearing and even allowing the other parties to establish to explain the need why certain action is being taken. I think as a Nigerian, any citizens of the world, I would expect the government to have released Sowore, and even Sowore to comply with the judgment that within 48 hours he should submit his international passport.
I'd like to take your thoughts on the report of the UN Special Rapporteur very briefly. There was one which detailed the violence, the extrajudicial killings in Nigeria, which the federal government has rejected, and the more recent one, which described the housing crisis, the housing shortfall in Nigeria, as a breach of human rights. But we're running out of time, so very briefly.
The thing is that we all know that housing is a real problem across the country. But the government is also very quick to tell you that Chapter 2 of the Constitution is not justiciable. They are not mandated. They cannot, ensure that they provide adequate housing, toilets, and so on and so forth for people, because you can't even take government to court for doing that. I think we need to extend the conversation about the social rights or economic rights of the citizens to ensure.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf, for joining us this morning.